As we progress through Wrath Classic, I can't help but notice a rise in interest for the vanilla version of the game beginning to grow within the player base. I think a lot of players would happily jump back to a vanilla version of the game given good timing and a concept which looks promising. But as usual, Blizzard holds all the cards here, and of course it's worth a mention, we don't know what's after Seasonal Mastery right now, and Classic Plus is totally just a community wish at this point in time. Yet while Seasonal Mastery is soon to wind up, we can't help but ask, what's next? Another season with more new ideas, a no changes fresh, or perhaps something much more ambitious? Since the early days of Classic, players have speculated what will come when the final boss of the expansion falls over, and everyone is there in their near-abyss gear twiddling their thumbs waiting for the next big content patch to drop. One of those ideas has always been Classic Plus, an unofficial term from the players, broadly meaning Classic, but instead of expansions to move us forwards into TBC and beyond, there are new major content patches added instead, or just updates to the game in the spirit of Classic. What if we never crossed the Dark Portal? What if there were new raids, or new dungeons, and anything else you can think of? After all, we have retail, we have Classic WoW as it currently is, which is chugging along through the expansions. Give it 18 more months from now and we'll be in Cataclysm Classic, I expect. Vanilla ran its course faster than it did originally, so did TBC by some 6 months, and Wrath will probably be a little bit shorter overall too. These are the places to re-experience expansions as they once were, so why not turn seasonal World of Warcraft into something different? Something entirely innovative with new content phases and regular updates. Why not go all in and do Classic Plus? Well, the pessimist will say it will cost money, time and effort to work on something new, so obviously that's not gonna happen, is it? And yeah, there's going to be a part of that, to be honest. Why take an unnecessary risk when you can just re-release expansions that you know people will come back for? But I think there's actually more to it than that. There's a bigger picture of problems that need to be addressed if Classic Plus were to actually be taken seriously. And for me, these are my 3 biggest problems with Classic Plus. But first, a word from today's sponsor, Gemstone Legends, a high fantasy puzzle style RPG game rated 4.6 stars on Android and almost 5 on iOS. You can download the game and try for free using the link in the description or the QR code on screen. Gemstone Legends has a puzzle style element of game, but also hero collection with more than 200 heroes from 8 different factions and 5 different tiers. Every hero has a unique set of skills which can be a game changer for strategy for each battle. During the puzzle battles, you can use epic combo attacks and your tactical sense, solving match 3 puzzles and conquering powerful monsters to build your empire. And there's dragons. Who doesn't like dragons? Gather clans as heroes and start an epic puzzle adventure in a high fantasy RPG open world. Fight in PvP modes and align with other dragon riders to compete in guild wars. There's even a Discord server where you can stay up to date with the game. I'm in the game under the nickname WillE. Download the game for free now on both Android and iOS and get started today by using the link in the description or the QR code on screen. You'll also get a special starter pack worth $50 by using my link, including 500,000 coins, 300 gems, 10 mana elixirs, 10 healing elixirs, and a 4-star hero, Annika. Many thanks to Gemstone Legends for sponsoring the video today. Back to WoW. The first point is, I've already done the content. Let me explain what I mean here. There was a time in World of Warcraft where it wasn't really known how far the game would go, what would be the next major content patch, and even whether there were going to be expansions. On a BlizzCon panel from 2007, I found something which really spoke to how Blizzard did content back then. Plan more than we can build, expect change, adapt. There wasn't just content ideas for the next patch or patch after that, there were just ideas that various devs wanted to be part of the game, things which they had worked upon and iterated upon. It was more of a question of where does this best fit within the game. After all, World of Warcraft in its early days had pretty heavy inspiration from the story of the RTS games to lean on. There were hours of cutscenes, cinematics and story twists to draw from. It just had to be the right time to introduce each one. on. In fact, in its early days, the level cap of vanilla was intended to be 70, and so much content that would be introduced with the expansion was either planned or actively was already being worked on. Here's another bit from the same BlizzCon 2007 panel. I know the quality's mega scuffed, I couldn't find better online unfortunately, but you can make out at the top that this was the dungeon list as planned from April 2003, that's pre-vanilla launch, and right at the bottom you can see the Black Temple as the final dungeon. It wasn't that content was necessarily cut from vanilla, it just wasn't used, and it was waiting its turn. It's no wonder that Katrazhan is located in Deadwind Pass, by the way, a strange place for an expansion raid to still be in vanilla, don't you think? This location and raid was in development long before TBC dropped. In fact, this dungeon would have almost put Blackrock Depths to shame, estimated in its earliest version to be as large as Lower Blackrock and Upper Blackrock Spire combined, and having a load time of 30 minutes. Tons of work have been done on the interior, the layout, texturing, and I have to say the early versions, especially from the outside, look particularly ominous. Not forgetting the Katrazhan crypts either, a series of spooky, sprawling tunnels below the tower, housing endless stone walls and restless bones. Again, an area that had begun to be fleshed out from a level design point of view, and it was partially used during the Katrazhan achievement in TBC, but never saw the proper light of day as its own piece of content. Mount Heigel is another one to highlight. In vanilla, it had a raid instance portal connecting it to the Dark Whisper Gorge in southern Winterspring. It was another zone with a bunch of work that had been put into it which just never released in vanilla. Again, we saw it in a lot more detail during the Burning Crusade as a raid, and eventually reimagined as a zone during Cataclysm. Even the Hellfire Peninsula had work put into it during vanilla. Again, it was planned to be a later game zone that would eventually ship with TBC. You can see tons of landscaping and floating mushrooms dominating the area in these early screenshots. Though at some point it was decided that instead of more and more major content patches, there would be a full-on expansion. Many of these unused ideas were roped together and bundled up for World of Warcraft's first foray into a totally new world. This would release in 2007 as the Burning Crusade, to a huge amount of success. And as we know now, Black Temple, Katrazhan, and Mount Heigel ended up being raiding content, and Hellfire Peninsula was the starting zone. I know this, and we all know this, because many of us have done them in TBC or TBC Classic, and that's what I mean when I say I've already done the content. Tons of things that were at an idea stage were later used in some form. Even the Dragon Isles were at a concept stage during vanilla, and that's just dropped as the latest retail expansion. The thing is, as much as I like Katrazhan, do I want to do it again at 60 with the same layout and the same bosses and the same loot that I already know? I'm not really sure that I do. What if Katrazhan was different? Maybe that could work instead. During Legion, Blizzard reimagined Katrazhan as a two-part mega dungeon, which kept aspects from the past while making it fit better into the newer game. I think one of the draws of a Classic Plus for me isn't just seeing stuff that we come to see eventually, but more something new, unexplored. Heigel, as it's set out in vanilla, has never been a zone, for example. What if that was to happen? If people came into a Classic Plus finally and just felt as though they had already done it and already seen it, that would be quite a letdown, I think. The second point I want to get into is, where does the new content go? Where does it fit? This is kind of a tangent to the question of how would servers be released. I'm assuming if it would happen, they would be fresh, which makes the most sense to me. World of Warcraft is always fun when you start from square zero, but then you have to ask, if there is new content, where does the new stuff go? Imagine the scenario. Classic Plus is here. Fresh servers are out, mega hype, new content, new class tuning, new dungeons, new raid, new everything. Okay, so first we have to get to level 60. Oh, wait, before we get to level 60, are we going to be doing any new dungeons pre-60? I mean, what's the point, right? You don't replay dungeons again and again pre-60 unless they are the best for either XP or gold farming, which means the new content kinda has to be better than the existing content, or it's going to be instantly run one time by people questing and then not seen again. Does that warrant the development time when it could be put into something at endgame instead? What about a new zone? If it's for leveling it again, people will do it once per character, if it's worth doing. There are some gaps in vanilla questing, I will say that, so maybe there is space to beef up the leveling journey a little bit. How about raids? raids. Imagine phase 1 is just Molten Core and Elixir again. Okay, so how many months of that do we have to do before we get a new bit of content? What if there was a new raid and it came between Molten Core and Blackwing Lure? Well, it has to raise the bar for gear a little, so again, it's worth doing. Maybe if we throw in a few bis, weapons, trinkets, whatever it may be in there, that'll get people going back to it. But then suddenly, oh no, Blackwing Lure itself has come out, in addition to Molten Core, the new raid, and Elixir. And on a weekly basis, then you would be doing Elixir for the tier head and the quest turn-ins, Molten Core for Eye of Shadow, leaves, bindings, and all the other items in there, Blackwing Lure for your rejuve gems, your DFTs, and whatever else, and the new raid for the bis items in there too. That's a lot of raiding, but then AQ40s come out, and suddenly about 90% of the old gear is now irrelevant. But you're still going to have to do them on raid night because there's like 3 bis items which everyone in the game wants, because that's how classic itemization works. Until Nax is out, of course, and then your raid is tired of doing an entire world tour every week. Also, Nax gear is kind of an insane step up over everything else. And that's vanilla with, hypothetically, only one more raid tier added. The alternative is that new raids are added after Nax, which solves absolutely nothing. Because if servers are fresh, that's 12 or however many months of no new raid content up to Nax. And if it's not fresh, players will go into the new raid with 25 bis geared warriors and absolutely delete it. And all the raid content prior to the newer raids would also kind of be dead on arrival. So where does the new content fit here? That's the question I really don't have an answer for. Whatever happens, there would be very clear downsides to it, I think, but maybe just getting something new is worth it all the same. Those are my 2 main concerns so far. Number 1, I've already done the content, and number 2, where would the new content go? And number 3 for me is about how World of Warcraft content is consumed, how the game is designed, and the development time that goes into creating new things for the game. So if you've played World of Warcraft for a while, you'll know what the end of expansion life cycle looks like. Sometimes it's up to, or in certain cases, over 1 year of literally nothing new. With Classic, we know the devs are building the game onto a more modern system, and that unfortunately they can't just boot up Wrath of the Lich King.exe and it magically all works, hence all the beta and PTR testing and brand new bugs and weird things going wrong occasionally. And I've noticed that the more WoW expansions have gone on, there tends to be more and more lead time between the new major patches. Whatever's going on in the background, it's just taking more time. On top of this, World of Warcraft content has a very short life cycle, and this is much more noticeable in the earlier versions of the game. This is what happens when you progress vertically as new content is stacked on top of one another. I will say this was less the case during vanilla. You wanted to go back and do the old raids, but in TBC and especially Wrath, there's just a lot more of do the current tier and then you're kind of done for the week. Add on top of this that the content being added has to raise the bar in one way or another, or it just won't be worth doing. And if there's something new, they have to make sure it's actually worth going to. I see many cases where Classic Pluses mention that Blizzard should take inspiration from the success of Jagex with old school RuneScape, which in theory is great. It's proof that new content can keep a game fresh and bring a whole new player base into the game and interested for years to come. But the similarities between old school RuneScape and World of Warcraft stop at them being called mmorpgs. If Molten Core was a raid in old school RuneScape, you'd have to defeat 40 servants of the Fire Lord outside of the instance before you could gain access. Each time you will be able to solo it, all the good drops will be 100 times rarer, everything will be tradable, the auction house is global, there's no weekly reset, and you can just spam it non-stop, and you would be able to do it with a team if you wanted. On top of that, old school RuneScape doesn't really even have a concept of endgame which is clearly defined. You don't get level cap then start playing. The actual cap in terms of having every skill at maximum level is not something many people have. Content there can remain relevant for years as nearly all gear is tradable. You still have reasons to go back like gold farming, collection logs, Iron Man accounts where they can't trade, and so on and so forth. And leveling there takes considerably longer, so people do invest in different tiers of gear, and you're going to be getting so much more use out of them. An example of this is within 1 year of launching, Jagex realized that old school RuneScape wasn't going to survive off pure nostalgia, and they started releasing brand new content. One of the first big new updates was in January 2015. This was about 2 years after launch. This was Zulrah. Yes, Zulrah is 8 years old, a solo solo boss that added a bunch of new items and mechanics to the game. Today, it still drops items that people would want to chase, and it's an okay gold farm, but it has been nerfed many times over. The point is, this is true across so many of RuneScape's updates. When Ulduar drops in Wrath, am I gonna do tier 7 again? Realistically, I think so, yeah, I'll still be doing Malagos and Sartharian's Lair, but just not full clears anymore. I haven't done a single Burning Crusade raid during Wrath, and during TBC, I didn't do a single full Classic raid either. It's just not how World of Warcraft works. There's very little reason to go back. Sure, there's a few mounts such as Rivendare's Death Charger from Strat Undead or the Zul'Gurub mounts that may be worth chasing for some collectors, but in the latter example, not even every class in the game can physically do that. I think you can start to see why Blizzard put transmog in the game and made old raids soloable. Keeping old content relevant is something that Blizzard has, in the grand scheme of things, recently made significant improvements too. There's Chromie time, pick any expansion you want to level in. Baited raids, go back and do previous raids from the expansion in a different way. Time walking, go and do old dungeons or raid, collect resources, buy collectibles. Adding pets to old raids, adjusting tuning so old raids can be soloed for collections, and so on. I just can't help but think Classic Plus is going to have a big dead content problem due to how content rolls out during the early versions of WoW and how fast players get through it all. Again, I'd love to hear suggestions on this. All that being said, don't get me wrong, I would love to see Classic Plus in the game as a real thing and for Blizzard to take this in a whole new direction. And whilst the whole "it'll take money so they won't do it" thing definitely has something to it, I think there's a lot more important things to be answered than just that. For Classic Plus to really work, it might not just be about adding the new content, but entirely rethinking the formula that makes people actually like Classic in the first place. Thanks once again to Gemstone Legends for sponsoring today. You can check it out via the link in the description or the QR code on screen. Let me know your thoughts on the 3 points I've gone over. Is there a clear answer out there to this, or is it going to involve a lot of compromising? In any event, thank you so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.